The country is still dealing with much of the wounds of its past. But what are the legal implications of using the K word, and what might this mean for other pejoratives being used for other population groups, for example, for other communities such as the LGBTI or even indeed women? Joining us now, as I say, is legal expert Professor James Grant. Prof, it is great to finally have you this evening after all the little problems that we've had. Good evening. And thank you for talking to us. I mean, this is a landmark case. The conviction specifically is for crimen injuria. Please, can you contextualize that?
Okay, so crimen injuria is the intentional infliction of an injury to the dignity of another person, and it can take different forms, so it's not specific to the use of the K word. It's anything that you do that infringes the dignity of another person. So, for instance, sexual harassment qualifies, spying on somebody qualifies, exposing yourself to somebody qualifies. So it's a sort of catch-all offence, but the crucial issue is whether you infringe that person's dignity.
And when it comes to the use of the K word, does that mean that even though you say it is a catch-all category, that, for example, that word may never really be used again in the same way?
Absolutely. I think that's been well understood, at least legally, for quite some time. But and in addition, there have been cases where the use of racial epithets has in fact been found. Well, the use of it has been treated as crimen injuria, but we've never seen a sentence such as this.
Were you surprised at the sentence and the idea that Vicky Momberg wasn't even given bail this evening and that she's going to spend it behind bars?
It's so difficult to pass judgment on it. I was surprised given the precedents in respect of crimen injuria, where at most we've seen fines of perhaps 10,000 rand, where our courts just didn't seem to be taking this seriously. So I suppose, given that it's such a vast departure, yes, I was surprised. On the other hand, if one takes account of the fact that perhaps we've reached a certain point in the development of our country, and a necessary point in terms of dealing with that, the use of that term, and also the extent of the use of that term, that perhaps one can start to understand, although I prefer not to take a position on whether it was the right sentence or not, one can at least get to understand the sentence.
I suppose you could say, Prof, that dignity is at issue here. That's a founding principle of our Constitution. Is this how other cases in the future might be dealt with, or is it specific to this particular offender? We also understand that she has not complied, for example, with the order of the Equality Court. Certainly throughout this process, she has not shown any remorse.
Yeah, I think you're right that all of that would certainly be treated as aggravating, insofar as whether the right that's in question, which is the right to dignity, is so central. Absolutely, and there can be no question, in my view, that the courts haven't been treating this offence sufficiently seriously. Whether they were right in going as far, whether the court was right in going as far as I did on this case. I think for me, it's all about trying to fix. If we accept that one can injure another person by words alone, then you have to start asking, well, all right, that's got to be in the same ballpark as, for instance, let's say an assault. So let's say the use of the K word is the equivalent perhaps of slapping somebody, right? But now, if you take that analogy and you run with it and you ask yourself the question, well, what would we do with somebody who slapped another person, and let's just add this, slapped another person who was trying to help them 48 times? They would get a fairly harsh sentence. And perhaps I'm also even underplaying it. I mean, perhaps the analogy of a slap is too little. Maybe it's more like when you get called the K word for the individual concerned. Maybe it's like being punched in the face, or maybe it's like being stabbed. So I think when people are trying to figure out is this right or wrong or overboard or not, I think we have to try and contextualize and compare it. And I think there's good grounds to put it in the same category as some form of assault. Certainly the law has taken that view. And it's punishable in criminal law. Our law accepts that by words alone you can hurt people. It's in the same category as assault. Now, what sort of assault do we treat this with?
Prof, it brings all kinds of questions to mind. I mean, you talk about maybe. There's a lot of maybes here because people will readily then say, how do you quantify an injury that isn't physical, for example? But it also takes us to other areas. I mean, what does this say then about other pejoratives, for example, that are used to other population groups or members of different communities, say the LGBTI community? How does this work? There is a case that I understand before the courts where two black people have taken each other to court over the use of this word. How likely is an appeal here given all the issues I've just raised?
Well, if I can start with the question around whether, for instance, one black person can commit injuria by calling another one a racial epithet. I think the question would simply be answered by running through the various requirements, and that is whether by the use there was offence caused which was serious and which was intended. And once that's all ticked, in fact, it's entirely possible that both of those people could be convicted, in my view. And then I think going forward, I expect that everything, of course, is going to be judged as a matter of degree. Perhaps it doesn't get worse than the use of the K word. Perhaps it does, but that's what the courts are going to have to decide on each and every occasion.
Right, we'll be keeping tabs on this story and any developments that might happen thereafter, particularly if some or other group tries to go behind an appeal. That was Professor James Grant, legal expert there on the line.